Good evening. At 6:03 p.m., this meeting of the Mount View Women's School Board is called to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will now take a roll call of the trustees.
Oh, thanks. It's fun. I'll go blonde in another couple of months.
Coleman, you are not muted.
Bill Lambert.
Laura Berman. Laura Blakely.
Chris Chain.
Devin Conley. Let the record reflect that all of the trustees are present. We will now move on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any questions or comments from trustees? All right. If there are members of the public who would like to address the board regarding this item, you can approach the podium or you can raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. All right, we have one in-person speaker. We're going to get a 3-minute timer up, and once that is ready, you may begin. All right, you are ready to begin, sir. Yes, press the, it looks like a talking man.
Oh, that one?
That's it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I can't see that red. Yeah, this is on one of the items having to do with 6 or 7C, which is about a joint use agreement, and closed session 9A1, which is also about joint use agreement. One of the things that the Brown Act does, and this isn't anything to say you shouldn't take either of these articles now, but the Brown Act says you're supposed to be explicit in what you're talking about. And when I first looked at this, and I said, oh, joint use agreement, oh, they're going to update what the this joint use agreement they're talking on later on. And then when I found that there are 2 different joint use agreements that this is talking about. And so you've seen there's been back and forth between the superintendent and I. Anytime it isn't explicit in your agenda items what something is talking about, and there is confusion or stuff is left out, that violates the Brown Act. You can't find it in the statute, you can find it in the case law. We have 2 lawyers on this board, they know what case law means. It gets into the minutia of what the legislature actually meant and what the law means when it's in operation. And so it isn't really going to be your superintendent that decides what the law is. It's not even going to be your counsel. If issues like this come up, it will be decided by a judge at the bench. Here's what the problem is. Anybody can see it's a simple problem. It has a simple correction. Just explain what joint use agreements are anytime you use them in your descriptions. And what this means is you guys have to do it, okay? It's easy for the staff to accidentally make a problem. So you guys have to review it, particularly the president. It's the president's responsibility to make sure things like this are done appropriately and in enough detail so it's explicit what's being talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, former trustee Nelson. Is there a motion from trustees?
I move that we approve the agenda as submitted.
I second.
All those in favor? Aye. On a motion made by trustee Blakely and seconded by trustee Lambert, the agenda was approved unanimously. We will now move on to item 2, special recognition. We have the employee recognition for the Turtle Awards. Dr. Rudolph.
Yep. So this is our monthly recognition of individuals who have went above and beyond. As you know, and as you've seen, employees are allowed to recognize each other. And as a result of that, they receive a golden turtle, and so this is this month's recognition.
Are there any comments or questions from trustees? Are there any comments from the public regarding this item? You can raise your hand in Zoom or approach the podium in person. Yes,
Not the public, but I was just going to say, I'm thrilled that there are so many of our employees that are deserving of recognition, and kudos to all of them. Keep up the great work.
I think it's a wonderful community building activity too, to recognize all of the hard work that our colleagues are doing and to really celebrate each other. So I'm glad that the district and staff are doing this year. Thank you to everyone who's participating. We will now move on to item 3, the consent agenda. I believe Ms. Bauer was going to pull something from consent.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. I apologize. Yes, I couldn't get my camera on. We'd like to pull item the item G, this Castro site plan, and we'll bring it back for approval on the 25th.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments from trustees? Right, we will take public comment on this, on the consent agenda. If you would like to comment, you can raise your hand in Zoom or approach the podium. And we have one in-person speaker. I don't see any speakers online, so we'll put a 3-minute timer on the board. And former trustee Nelson, to be clear, you're only going to speak on one. Okay, thank you.
Just on item N.
You're all set?
Thank you. Yes, one of the things about item M, apparently this item is, as the cover sheet said, but it wasn't clear to me, combining 2 district office management positions into one. Unfortunately, it does say that the financial implications are $250,000. And it doesn't say actually that pencils out, since there are 2 combining positions, to be a saving $10,000 and having one less management person in the district office. When you says the financial implications are $250,000, I assume that's approximate, first of all, but also I assume that's a positive. It's going to increase it as $250,000. So I'd like to know how much the savings is going to be. If Dr. Rudolph says this is, in fact, an example of good management at a high level, where you're listening to what the review was a number of years ago, that we had too many people in the district office and they were at too high levels compared to comparative districts with similar size student bodies. So I'd like to know what that financial number is. Is it really, this is going to cost us $250,000 more for this position? Or what's the savings going to be, since it's combining positions? Is that clear, board? The question I'm asking? I don't know if I can ask the question. I don't know if it'll get answered. But
The board is not able to respond to public comment.
actually, the board can ask the superintendent for things. If you look at what the Brown Act says, I think your only thing says you can't comment to me. You can ask staff. Thank you.
Thank you, former trustee Nelson. Are there any comments or questions from trustees or a motion?
I actually did have a question about the $250,000, and it's approximate. Is that grossed up to include benefits, or would that be salary of up to that amount, depending on
It's salary and benefits, but
and
we don't.
benefits?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a motion from trustees?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented, with the exception of item G that's going to be deferred for another meeting.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. On a motion made by trustee Blakely and seconded by trustee Berman, the consent agenda with item G removed is approved unanimously. We will now move on to item 4, communications from employee organizations. Are there any representatives of employee organizations who would like to address the board at this time? I don't see any in the room, but if you're on Zoom, you can raise your hand or press star 9 on your phone. Seeing as there are none, we will now move on to district committees. Are there any representatives of district committees who would like to address the board at this time? You can raise your hand in Zoom. Seeing as there are none, we will now move on to the superintendent's update.
All right, well, Happy New Year, everyone. Glad to be back. Just wanted to note two things today, not many updates, but first we did get notification about our Green Schools application. We scored a 78%, which is a gold rating. So right underneath the tier to make it into the federal distinction, but there's a couple of suggestions that they have that we can make that will increase our score for the next round. So we will be going for that, but we first time out to be at gold really speaks volumes to the work that we've done. So super excited about that. And we will redo the application and apply with the goal of making it to the federal distinction of a green school district. Also want to point out just for everyone that if you haven't been by Vargas, the trees are going in. The whole front of the Wistman Road now has trees lined with it with smaller brushes underneath, and then along the outside of the actual field, you see additional trees that have been added. So unlike before, or unlike our last meeting where it was still in the conceptual part and they were designing and sort of running the water, you now can actually see it coming to life. So I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity to drive down Wistman Road, to see that. And then I also want to thank the trustees. I know not everyone was able to attend or people were bouncing in and out, but we did host a group from Charlotte Mecklenburg who was also exploring teacher housing. And I just want to thank the trustees. Big thank you to Corinne, Shelley, and Nancy for pulling this together and making it a worthwhile event. And then I also want to thank Fort Bay for coming in and taking us on a tour, but also for the city for participating and bringing city council members as well as city staff to talk about sort of everybody's perspective and how teacher housing came to be. And we're going to keep our fingers crossed. The building is supposed to be done in 6 months' time. So maybe we can get something nice out of that we can start next year with a big, nice opening surprise. So just wanted to give those couple updates. We'll keep you posted. I know that we've talked about the possibility if the building could get opened a little bit faster without the parking. And after talking with Perry from Miramar, I think he's going to go out and speak with the city to see if that's also possible. So just wanted to give those 3 updates, but looks like 2024 is already off to a great start.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rudolph. That's all great news.
Madam President, I have a comment on that agenda item.
If there are members of the public who would like to comment on the superintendent's update, you can raise your hand in Zoom or approach the podium. I don't see any speakers online, so we will put a 3-minute timer up on the board.
Hope
All right, Mr. Nelson.
Ready? Hope I can take less than that. I just wondered, there was potential holdups on the occupancy of those apartments because of something the city was saying about the parking structure won't be done. And I wonder if there's anything that can be, you can ask for a variance for allowing those apartments or some of those apartments to be occupied, even if there aren't that separate parking structure finished. I don't know if you can arrange some parking here because it's close, or even arrange some parking, lease some parking at the Safeway, which is right across the street from where those apartments are. But if they're, you should goose the city government some and say, this is something for all our community. Give us a variance, let us do it. So that's my comment on what the superintendent's update on that great project was.
Thank you, former trustee Nelson. We will now move on to item 5, community comments. This is the time reserved for community members to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board and administration welcome this opportunity to listen. However, in compliance with the Brown Act, the board is not permitted to take action on non-agenda items. To address the board, you can approach the podium, or in Zoom, you can raise your hand or press *9 on your phone. I do not see any online comments. We do have one in-person comment. We'll get our 3-minute timer back up on the board. All right, you may begin when you are ready.
Thank you very much. I wanted to remind you, I finished the second one of these graphs of how big the academic gap is in the last year's Common Core assessments. This is between A is for Asian, W is for white, and H is for Hispanic. The width of these correspond to how many of those number of students were in our school district at the end of last year. These two displays, the one on the right has to do with what math was in the 8th grade. And the one on the left, the same scale factor, is what the ELA performance was. This is meeting standard or above on these two Common Core graphs. I think I've showed you the other one before. I didn't put the line on it that shows where the Hispanics are doing significantly less well than they did 5 years ago. It's worse what portion they went down in math. It's not quite as bad in this one here, ELA, but that gap represents what is a visual indication of what the academic performance gap is between Hispanics in our district and Asians and whites. Keep that in mind as we go on to this thing later on, which is the, what is it? Anyway, the fancy blue and white, yeah, dashboards. This is another way of looking at just the academic performance on the dashboard. This is just when students are ending their education in our district, right, 8th grade. It looks similar for the 5th grade one. I'll bring that up later, some other meeting. But yeah, it's significant. It's persistent. The whites and Asians have recovered from before the pandemic. The Asians, particularly in ELA arts, have increased. It's over 90% now of them are meeting the state standards. Thank you.
Thank you, former trustee Nelson. We will now move on to item 6A under review and action. It's the naming the board representative for the county committee 2024 election. My understanding is that this item is the board appointing by vote someone to then place a vote in the county committee election, not to actually serve on the county committee, but to place a vote representing our board for the county committee election. And this came to us a little bit late because it was the application or the information was sent to us late this year. Dr. Rudolph.
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say. We got the request after our board meeting, and we didn't have another one in December, so that's why it's coming now.
Are there any questions from trustees?
Yeah, I'm still a little bit confused. We're trying to appoint one of us
Yes,
then to, oh, okay.
to then vote on who will be on the county committee.
Okay. And then I don't know if this is a clarifying question. Is there anybody here among the 5 of us who's interested in doing so? Is that appropriate or should I ask?
I think in the past it's usually been the board president, but it doesn't have to be. If there's someone who has a burning desire.
I was just going to say, I think it's been the board president, so I would say that we have President Conley serve in that role.
Well, we'll take public comment real quick. If you are a member of the public and you would like to comment on this item, you can approach the podium or you can raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Seeing as there are no comments at this time, is there a motion from trustees?
I would like to make a motion that President Conley serve as the board representative for the County Committee 2024 election.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. On a motion made by trustee Berman and seconded by Vice President Chang, the Board of Trustees voted unanimously to name myself as the board member representative for the County Committee 2024 election. We will now move on to item 7A under review and discussion. We're going to look at the 2023 California Dashboard Update, and we have Chief Academic Officer Kathy Bauer to present. Good evening, Ms. Bauer.
Good evening, trustees. I will just get my screen shared here. Okay. All right, so I'm trying to. Okay, so tonight I'm here to present the results of the dashboard, which was released in December. And the results of the dashboard are examining our work and our progress during the 2022-23 school year. So it is, 6 months behind as we're already halfway through our school year this year. Our dashboard is our state's accountability system. It displays performance on multiple state and local measures and assesses how districts and schools are meeting the needs of their students. The state uses the dashboard to identify schools and districts that may need technical assistance and intervention, and the district uses its results to identify strengths, weaknesses, and areas in need of improvement. The dashboard's made up of 2 different indicators, local indicators and state indicators. For local indicators, these are indicators where state data is not available for some of these priority areas. So we're talking about basic services, conditions of learning, implementation of state standards, parent engagement, school climate, and broad course of study. And for these indicators, we actually go through a process using rubrics that are provided by the state, and we rate ourselves, and we rate ourselves on our progress. We're meeting progress, we're not meeting progress. We report the results to you, the governing board, at the same time we have our LCAP approved, and then I upload those results to the dashboard prior to it being released. The state indicators, these are results where the state collects data, and then they report on our results. So academic indicators, language, arts, and math, suspension rate, English learners indicator, and chronic absenteeism rates. Graduation rate in college and career are only reported for high schools. On the state indicators, ratings are given for all the indicators, and we want to keep in mind that for suspensions and chronic absenteeism, we want to see low or very low ratings, indicating that we have low rates of chronic absenteeism and suspension, and we want to see those rates declining. For academic indicators and English learner progress indicator, we want to have high or very high ratings, indicating high rates of student progress and achievement, and we want to see those results increasing. So the state measures performance based on 2 factors, status and change. So where we are in comparison to where we were. So what were our results at the end of 22-23 compared to what were our results at the end of the 21-22 school year? That's what this dashboard is showing. They create these 5x5 tables that have cut points for status and change, and then our district ratings are placed onto that table, and then that determines our performance level. And you have to have 2 years of data to receive that color rating, and this is what it looks like. This is just a sample of what one of those looks like on the dashboard. Remembering back to last year for 2022, we only had 1 year of data coming out of the pandemic. And so we only were given status data, and we had these purple cell phone bars that kind of said, were we low, very low, medium, high, or very high? And that's changed now for this year, where we have 2 years of data. So now we're going to get a performance level and a color status. When they're looking at performance levels, they're applied to all district schools and student groups with 30 or more students, with the exception of homeless and foster youth at the district level, if there are 15 or more students in those groups. Student groups with 11 to 29 students have a result displayed, but they're not assigned a performance level or a color. And student groups with 10 or fewer students are not rated at all to protect confidentiality. This is what that looks like. You can see here, if we look at English learners, it gives our percent chronically absent. Did that rate decrease or increase from the previous year, and how many students were in that particular student group? So these are just some pages that show what the dashboard looks like. This is where you go when you Google it. This is our landing page. You can click into each of these boxes to get information. You can dig into language arts, mathematics, English learner progress, and then you can also get student group details and information and percentages. So let's talk about the indicators. Again, remembering that the dashboard is based on results from 2022-23. So it's really it's kind of an assessment of how we did in the 2022-2023 school year. All of our student groups with 30 or more kids will have a rating and a corresponding color. And we're looking at ratings instead of colors this year. So low compared to high, because there were not colors assigned last year. So this is just a example of, this is how we did. We always show our neighboring districts. How are we doing in comparison to the districts around us? You can see we've compared ourselves for chronic absenteeism. We're actually have a medium rate, so we're actually doing better in that area than our surrounding districts. Although in suspensions, we are not. We have much higher rates of suspension than our surrounding districts. And we have high rates compared to very high rates or high and medium rates of performance in language arts and math. And this year we do see a lower rate in terms of English learner progress. And we'll talk about all of these in depth. So we'll start with chronic absenteeism. We want to just remember that a student is considered chronically absent if he or she has been absent 10% of the days they were enrolled in school. So if they were unexcused, excused, or suspended, they were gone 10%, they're considered chronically absent. And these rates change over the course of the year as kids attend school more days. And this is different from truancy. Truancy only looks at unexcused absences. And when the state calculates our rates, they're looking at all students in grades TK to 8. And again, the goal is to have low or very low ratings, and we want to see our numbers decreasing. So if we look at our rates, these are the district rate overall rates, and by subgroup district-wide, you can see there's lots of down arrows there. We did decrease in overall chronic absenteeism, and the majority of our subgroups did decrease with chronic absenteeism numbers. And this is important because students need to be in school in order to learn. And then if we look at it by site, again, we see a lot of down arrows, which is a positive. We want to see our rates going down. Of course, our rates aren't where we want them to be. They're definitely not back to where they were pre-pandemic, but we want to continue to trend in the downward way. So some trends that we see, our rating is medium. We did have a small decrease overall. We're definitely in a better place than the state as a whole. Our chronic absenteeism, we did focus quite a bit on this last year. And we saw some of our most at-risk student groups lower chronic absenteeism rates, including our English learners, our students identifying as homeless, socioeconomically disadvantaged, and Hispanic Latino students. But our students with disabilities did have a slight increase, and they still have a very high rate of chronic absenteeism. And then I do want to shout out to Castro. Castro had very high rates and still has high rates of chronic absenteeism, but they had decreases across the board with all of their student groups, and a 20.9% decrease for students identified as homeless. And it's, again, so important for kids to be in school so that they can participate in instruction. So now looking at suspensions, suspension indicator is looked at, it's counted as if any student is suspended all students who are suspended, and they look at it, they count it as being suspended once. So you're not penalized if you're suspended multiple times, but any student that was suspended is included in this indicator. We look at suspensions for all grades TK to 8, includes both in-school and out-of-school suspensions, and our goal is to have low or very low ratings for suspensions. So here what we're seeing is actually our arrows trending in the wrong direction. We're seeing our suspension rates increase over year for year from 2022 to 2023, and increase for our subgroups, our student groups, and also increasing some varying degrees of increasing and decreasing across our sites. And so looking at trends, our suspension rate overall as a district increased 1.2%. We're still below the state's suspension rate. And our suspension rates, as I mentioned, increased for all student groups compared to 21-22, except for Filipino students and students identified as 2 or more races. We have the highest suspension rates for our students identifying as homeless and students with disabilities and socioeconomically disadvantaged, which are exactly the kids that really need to be in school. Crittenden and Castro have the highest suspension rates as of at the end of last year. So moving on to English Learner Progress Indicator, what we affectionately call the LP. This shows the percentage of students who moved up at least one performance level on the summative LPAC or maintained a level 4. And this maintaining the 4 or moving up is showing increasing levels of English, gaining English proficiency, and we want to see those percentages increase. This is truly an English learner
Really good. Yeah, really good.
indicator.
I'm trying not to get too overwhelmed.
Ms. Holden, can you mute yourself, please?
And it truly is an English learner indicator. It does not include reclassified students at all. And there is a penalty if we do not test all at least 95% of students on the LPAC, and I'll talk about participation rate in a little bit. A little more about the LP. There's 6 levels that are derived from the 4 LPAC levels. So there's levels 1 to 4 on the LPAC, but they took LPAC levels 2 and 3 and split them into a low and a high range. And they did that because it reflects the research that it takes about 5 to 7 years for an English learner to reach English language proficiency. So that's how they determine, they place students into one of those 6 levels, and that's how they determine our LP. And this is just a quick visual of what that looks like. And then we can see our rates compared over the 2 years. You can see we had a slight decrease overall, and we see some increases and some decreases across the board for our schools. Interesting to note, so like I said, we did have a decrease in terms of proficiency of 2.6%. We did, though, see an increase of our English learners from 645 to 710, which is pre-pandemic. When we were looking at our numbers, our English learner numbers were actually decreasing, and so now they're increasing. The majority of our schools did decrease in the percentage of English learners making progress. Landals was a standout. They had 70.6% of students making progress, English learners making progress towards English proficiency. And we had 4 schools rated as low or very low: Vargas, Castro, Montaloma, and Graham. I do want to say that this is, looking at this on the surface, it's difficult. And this is work that we have to do to dive into the data to figure out who are the English learners we're talking about. When did they arrive? Are they newcomers? Are they newcomers in middle school? All of those pieces play into this data. So then we talk academic indicators. So this is language arts and math. The ratings are based primarily on the results of the grades 3 through 8 Smarter Balanced summative assessments and the California alternate assessments. Although our percentage of students who take the CAAs is very small. And they use a methodology using scale scores called distance from standard to determine our status level. And again, we want to have high or very high ratings. So distance from standard is where each student's assessment score is compared to the lowest possible scale score to achieve level 3, which is standard met. So, and if you're looking at it as an example, if you have the grade 5 math CAS math test, the lowest scale score to obtain level 3 is 2528. If a student received a score of 2505, that student would be 23 points below level 3. If the student received a score of 2535, they'd be 7 points above level 3. So they compare every student's score to that lowest level 3, and then they take an average to produce district, school, and student group scores. This is just a sample. You can see that 2505, this is the score range for a level 3, and that's how they determine distance from standard for that particular student. With academic indicators, as I mentioned with the LP, we have to have 95% of students participating in our standardized assessments. If we do not meet the target, the percentage of students needed to bring it up to 95% will be factored into our results, and we're penalized. And ESSA requires this 95% participation rate, and California Education Code allows parents upon written request to opt their children out of testing. So we have to notify parents of this right, but yet we're still required to make sure that 95% of students participate. The penalty will reduce the distance from standard for districts and schools that do not meet this 95%. And we've had penalties in the past. So before the pandemic, previous dashboard, there was a penalty, but the new penalty that's in place is definitely more severe than what we had previously. We did meet our 95% participation rate across the board. We didn't have any penalties applied. We're right on the cusp with our students with disabilities. They are right at 95%. This is just the methodology used. In the previous years, they calculated using the number of percentage points below 95% and applied a 0.25 penalty for each point, which gave you a small penalty. Now they look at the number of students needed to bring your participation rate up to 95%. And for each one of those students, they assign them what's called the lowest obtainable scale score or loss score. And then they figure that into your calculation for the DFS, which then determines your dashboard rating, which if you have a large number of students can really affect your DFS score and your rating. This is just kind of a sample so you can kind of get a visual. With the older penalty, you didn't meet 95%, you lost about 4 points, but it didn't change your status level on the dashboard. In the new methodology, you would actually you would drop from high status to low status on the dashboard. So looking at our scores, just show you here. If we look at our ratings here, we can, oops, excuse me. For our overall in groups, you can see that we're still very much so in similar rating areas, but what we have to look at is the distance from standard on this side. So for example, for the district, we were plus 40 above standard, right? 40 points above. And in 2022, and in 2023, we dropped a tiny bit to 36.8. We remained fairly flat in terms of levels of achievement. But if you look at our English learners, they were 42.4 points below standard, distance from standard on average. But in 2023, they were 55.8 points. And that's not the direction we would like to see. We'd like to see all pluses, or if student groups are in the negative, we want to see that number getting smaller rather than bigger. We want them getting closer to meeting standard. This is what it looks like for our schools on an overall level. You can see a lot of positive movement, but also some negative. So for trends, if we look at, we're in the high rating with a DFS of 36.8 points above standard. our subgroups that are most, our student groups that are most at risk have very low or low ratings, and they fell farther from standard in the 22-23 school year. And our homeless students identifying as homeless are in the very low category right now. And most of our schools have fairly high ratings. Dericoff and Castro have very low and respectively medium rates. And then we look at math. Math, we remain pretty flat overall, staying around 24 points distance from standard. But again, we're seeing that same trend where some of our most challenged student groups are moving away or are getting farther away from meeting standard as opposed to getting closer. And this is our schools, similar story. Castro remained fairly flat in math, but we want to reverse this trend. We're definitely, like I said, we remain flat. We're definitely above the state levels right now on average. And again, that same trend where our most at-risk student groups are falling farther from standard compared from 2021, 22 to 22, 23. So systems of support. California has a 3-tiered system of support. So for districts that are not showing improvement, they have general assistance that is for everybody. They have differentiated assistance that is districts that are identified that have performance issues and disparities in performance among student groups. And then you have intensive intervention for districts that fail to improve over time. Then you have federal accountability. ESSA requires states to identify categories of schools for different types of support. You have comprehensive support and improvement, CSI, which is looking at the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools. And then you have what's called ATSI, or additional targeted support and improvement, where schools are not already identified for CSI, where student groups are performing at or below the level of schools, the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools in a certain area. This just kind of shows what it looks like, the accountability system, and who's eligible for different levels of support. And then this talks about how sites or student groups or districts are identified for differentiated assistance, which is district level. It's looking at your student group performance over priority areas. Comprehensive support and improvement is looking at Title I schools, and ATSI is looking at your lowest performing schools and looking at your indicators on the dashboard. So we have been identified for differentiated assistance due to very low ELA and math scores and very high suspension rates for students identified as homeless. And we will be in differentiated assistance for working on improving those rates through the 25-26 school year. We're also continuing to be in differentiated assistance for chronic absenteeism rates for students identified as homeless through the end of the 24-25 school year. But we did make a significant decrease in that percentage. We decreased 10.7% with our work done last year. And then additionally, this year, we've been identified for chronic absenteeism and suspension rates for students with disabilities, and that will be a 2-year process. We'll work closely with the Santa Clara County Office of Education. The first meeting is on January 24th. And we have not seen the list for schools identified for CSI or ATSI as of yet. We did have schools identified for ATSI last year, and they're continuing to implement their plans. So some things to consider. As I mentioned before, the dashboard, while it's a helpful tool, not being released till December is not so helpful. There is a plan and a timeline to move up the release of the dashboard. So what will be happening hopefully in October with the release of the CASP scores. But that's a release over time. We did focus quite a bit on chronic absenteeism last year, and we continue to do so. And we did see decreases in those rates. for most of our student groups. We'll continue, again, we've been identified for differentiated assistance. And I think we still have to remember that while we're years away now, several years out from the pandemic, the negative effects of the pandemic persist, and the impacts on student learning and wellness were significant. And it widened pre-existing gaps and achievement gaps. We definitely are nowhere near where we were before the pandemic, but we're working very hard to start closing those gaps and get back to where we were. We continue to have staffing issues in special education, and we need to balance, as we look to fill gaps, we have to balance high quality instruction and intervention at the same time. So some action steps for chronic absenteeism. We worked the last year to revise and refine our attendance protocols, including getting daily information about why students are absent in order to monitor trends and intervene. We've reinstated the school attendance review team. We provided principals with a set of possible interventions related to attendance. We're using our universal data cycle to review and respond to student absenteeism throughout the year. And we have more better reporting and processes for supporting our McKinney-Vento students with our school and community engagement facilitators and our principals to follow up with families and address their needs individually. For suspensions, last year, the district team created a new behavior response system, and that was implemented this year. And the goal of that was really to have a consistent way of looking at discipline and being able to be consistent with how it's addressed across the district. We revised the district-wide referral and student statement forms, and we're providing additional training to students on how they enter referrals. We're looking at data as a district to look at trends. And then we're also providing training to site administrators on how to mitigate negative effects of bias on the discipline process. English learner process, we're continuing designated ELD, maintaining our work with SIOP as the instructional approach to English, like integrated English language development. We continue to have our TOSA, who's working to train both school sites and individual teachers and principals. And she's very key in the work of monitoring and supporting our newcomer teachers in our newcomer program. We do have our elementary newcomer program that came into effect this year. We have 2 district teachers who are providing immediate needs for newcomer students. We have a district-wide middle school newcomer program via a new transitional English language arts course at middle school. And we're definitely making sure that we're in the classrooms visiting and seeing what's happening. For academic indicators, we're in our first full year of implementation of MTSS. We've provided quite a bit of training over the course of this year at our leadership team meetings for our principals. In October, teacher teams work through the universal data cycle steps. We also provided additional training on dyslexia awareness for all of our elementary teachers on that day. In January, again, we worked on the Universal Data Cycle 3. We did some SIOP training, and we had Anti-Defamation League trainers here to train educators about the intersection of identity, bias, and allyship. We have our early literacy team that's fully up and running. They've gone through several cycles. They've reduced the number of students in Tier 3 in phonics, which is great. We're providing training on the science of reading and instructional shifts to our site principals bi-monthly at our LT meetings, and we've provided training to our coaches. And we're starting now with teacher professional development happening. It started at the early literacy sites, Castro, Mistral, Montaloma, and Therakoff. We have an after-school series that starts in January. And then we're providing, all of our sites will be doing site-based science of reading professional development in spring. And this is really to get us ready for our new adoption, which is coming next year. We just finished our first round of data meetings with all of our principals. We looked at I-ready data, chronic absenteeism data, suspension data. We talked about what was happening at each of the sites and what work the sites were doing to address challenges and what successes they were having. The equity framework, Director Pullman has brought that to you, and we're continuing working on that, and refinement and training is continuing this year. So for next steps, our sites will be sharing their dashboard results and ratings with their stakeholders. Sites are in the process of looking at their site plans to make adjustments if needed. We'll be administering the district LCAP climate survey at the end of January, and starting a work on our LCAP for 24-25. We're continuing with MTSS, and we're going to work with the county office to continue to address areas identified for differentiated assistance. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to open for questions. And I just wanted to say that while I'm the one who presents all the data and puts it together for you, there's lots of people here that can answer questions, because there's a very large team that's involved in all of these different indicators. So the principals are here and directors are here. So happy to answer whatever questions you have.
Thank you very much, Chief Academic Officer Bauer. Are there questions from trustees? Yes, those lights are going on. We will start with Trustee Blakely.
Thank you. And thank you, Director Bauer and the whole team. I know I'm reading this presentation and the report at the end. This has been a ton of work to just analyze this all and pull it together and apply it. So very much appreciate that. But I did have a question for some of these items like suspensions and also like the academic indicators for math and ELA. Have we looked at disaggregating the data for grade level? Or even like like for suspensions, I was thinking about TK, like, are there more suspensions at the lower level because kids haven't learned how to control themselves? Is there any kind of like focus on particular grade levels? Or even at a school, at an individual school, are they looking at the grade level and it turns out like there's more problems on the academic indicators in math for second grade or something like that? I guess it's grades 4 through 8, so it would be the older grades, but just wondering if we're looking at that.
Yeah, so definitely I can talk to the academic piece. So we definitely look at the academic data. We break it down by, we look at it overall, but then you break it down by grade level. They also break it down by class. And when we start looking at the I-ready data, they start looking at it by student as well. So they are looking at it at a pretty, they start high and move low, like, you know what I mean? Get more targeted so that they can create strategies and plans for addressing the gaps. I think that I would have to defer to the team that's working on the behavior response for how they're looking at that data. Director Chang and Director Pullman, who are really working with the data on that right now. So if one of them would like to answer that question and how they're working with sites to look at the data.
I'm happy to chime in along with Director Chang. One of the things that we're doing right now, since we're newly implementing the behavior framework and standards for dealing with incidents, is looking at all the data that's coming back from sites in terms of their adherence to the system. But we are collecting data every single cycle in terms of looking at the suspensions and looking at the incidents by lots of different factors, and grade level is one of them. So though we're new into that process, yes, we definitely are looking at grade level data when it comes to suspensions by site.
Just to follow up on those questions, are you seeing any trends that are helpful, or is that even a helpful exercise?
That's something that we can bring back. I wouldn't want to say something right now that, without the rest of the team looking at the data directly, but it's definitely something that we can bring back to talk about if there's specific trends in grade levels, something we can get to you.
Thank you. Trustee Berman.
Sure. I'm wondering if you can pull up the neighboring districts slide. I just have a question about that slide.
Sure.
Thank you.
Oops, that's not the right one. Let me grab it. Oh, that's not gonna be it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm all trying to find it. I'm sorry. It's not coming for me at this moment. It's not liking me today.
Pose my question. So I just wanted to clarify for Sunnyvale for English learners.
Right.
It says that they're high. It says 51.9, which is actually lower than our score. And I'm
Right.
wondering if that, am I looking at that correctly? Is it, so should it be low because they're 51.9, they're lower than we are, or
You
is
know,
it percentage, is it a typo?
I will check. I will check because I noticed that when I was
Which
presenting.
are they high?
But the other,
Yeah.
the other piece is that it all depends on where you fall in the grid too, what your color rating is. So there was a point when I was looking at a couple of these where the state percentages were so much higher, but they were the same color rating as we are. So it all depends on that grid, but I will check that for you. I'll make sure I didn't make a mistake.
Okay, thank you for checking. I also am thinking, when I think about our initiatives and having looked through all the site plans, it seems that, we have initiatives and goals that align with the needs that, this shows up for us, right? Like we're sort of hearing a similar story that we've been hearing over the last, couple of years. But looking at it in this way, is there anything different that came through in the data? Like, did you feel like, wow, maybe we haven't been looking at this, or maybe there's more that we should be doing in this respect? I'm just wondering from your perspective, having gone through this tremendous exercise of plugging in all this data, and there are opportunities to sort of filter it in sort of these different ways, like the ELs, and there's 6 categories instead of 4, for example. Just wondering if anything came up for you in terms of something that we need to maybe shift a tiny bit.
You know what, I was really, I was, so I'll say 2 things. I was not surprised with the suspension data. I had a feeling that that was going to be higher because we knew we were needed to put into place a more consistent system for that. So I think that what we're going to see over time is that's going to change. I was surprised with the English learner progress indicator data. I was surprised that we weren't seeing as much progress as we had done in the years past. And so I think that's an area that we really do need to dive into more to take a look at why. I don't know if it's, we saw an increase in English learners. I don't know off the top of my head. I know we saw a huge increase of newcomers in the 22-23 school year. So I don't think we're just not seeing the same progress, but that's a place that I think we need to disaggregate the data more within the district to take a look at why is that happening. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's a really valid point. I was looking at the increase in English language learners, and it basically went up 10%, right, of the number of English language learners we have and the number that came in. So it almost feels like you have this constantly moving goal. So you feel like you're making progress, but then you get so many more English, newcomers into our school system, to our district. So you're making progress with the ones that are here, but so I feel like it's constantly shifting. So I understand. I could see why you're surprised, given all the work that's been going on with our EL students.
Definitely.
And I was hoping that maybe those 6 categories for the ELs maybe would help us understand that a little bit better, but it sounds like there's still more work to be done. So we can, like you mentioned in that part, you said, let's dive in and really think about each individual students, because, we know every data point is a child. And so what's the story behind the child? How long have they been here? And also that story of their own lived experience, because that will impact their performance in our classrooms. Thank you.
Vice President Chang.
But just one question about at any of the school sites, whether middle school or elementary school, is there any difference between gender when it comes to chronic absenteeism? Like without looking at like specific data, just like, are we seeing any general difference of there being more girls or boys being absent at either level?
Trustee Chang, that's a great question, and I don't have that answer for you tonight, but I will take a look. I know that we have looked at that data, but I don't have it with me.
Are there any further questions? I have just a couple. I do think some of the things that we've asked that have been discussed being brought back, it could be sent back just as a written report, possibly either in the weekly that comes to trustees or in consent in the future. So I'm really concerned about our McKinney-Vento students. And I'm wondering if we have a feel right now, and this may be for Mr. Chang, how many of those students are located in county-affiliated sites? So for example, the Mountain View Safe Parking Lots, the services are run by the county, and the Home Key Project, that's also run by the county. Do we have a sense of how many kids are there from our district?
And I will just say, Director Chain was having trouble unmuting. Could he get unmuted or get co-hosting privileges? Let me
He is a
see if I-
co-host right now.
Yeah, there. You should be able to unmute now.
Sorry about that. I was looking for Zoom on my computer. That's information that we can quickly gather and send back to you after the meeting.
That would
We
be
don't have that. I don't have that on hand right now.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I think there's a real opportunity here to advocate for a standard of care for homeless children who are within county-run facilities, which most of the shelters in the county are administered by the county, even if they exist through partnerships with municipalities. But I think there should be a basic standard of care for our homeless children. And and Trustee Berman toured the Sunnyvale shelter last spring, I suppose, and there really wasn't any type of consistency or standard of care for children in that facility. Since then, I don't think it allows families in the same way that it did, but at the same time, I know we have sites within our own school district or own city where students are staying, and can we provide them a better standard of care? Will the directed assistance plans that are developed and the progress on that, will that be brought to the board regarding our homeless students and our students with disabilities?
It's definitely something we can bring if the board would like us to. We work through a specific process that the county leads us through, but we can definitely share that and share that information with you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
We will now move to public comment. If you're a member of the public and you would like to comment on this item, you can approach the podium or you can press *9 on your phone or raise your hand in Zoom. I have one in-person comment, so we'll put a 3-minute timer on the board.
By the way, I wanted to pull up the LP table and discussion. That's available. Oops, I guess it can't both be done.
My
That's okay.
apologies.
I sent written comments on the chronic absentee problem and what seems to be a serious lack of depth, I would say, of the efforts at Castro. Notice board, that means money. Anytime when you're going to hire more people, if you're going to take care of a chronic absentee problem at a very poor school like Castro, a school rather that has lots of poor families, those social positions that are going to call up people are very important. The least school clearly has the most need of help. I think if you pull up the ELPI school tables in the discussion, one of the things I would really like to see on data presentations from this district and this department is if schools were ordered for specific things like by the number of EL students in a school. There is more than 100 of these students at Castro School, and I think a dozen or less at, you'll have to correct me, at each of Amai and Stevenson. That makes a tremendous amount of difference of how many resources are needed for these kinds of children having these kinds of problems. If there is a school that has 110 of these students that are having problems, it's going to need a lot more help from you. You giving more money, you making policies that put more people in those schools rather than the schools that only have a dozen. That info is really critical in understanding visuals. How many individual students are affected? I think Trustee Berman said, these are numbers, but they have to do with individuals. So the more you show data tables with individuals, if it's a big area, it says there's more individuals that have this problem. If it's a small area, it shows there's less individuals that have this problem. Academic indicator tables. What about the number along with the group name? The total in the district is 5,000, or the total that we're looking at in these numbers may be 3,000. What about the number along with the group name, homeless number? Was it 52, it's somewhere in the 50s or 60s? SED number, that's something like 1,500, and so on and so forth. So please have better data, meaning better data visuals, not just a bunch of text, not just a bunch of sentences, but stuff that makes sense from a data scientist, like we might see these things show up in the Mountain View Voice.
Thank you, former trustee Nelson. Are there comments from trustees? Vice President Chang.
Thank you. I really appreciate the district's approach to addressing the chronic absenteeism and particularly that that we don't focus on punitive measures in our district. I think in the past, the old way of doing schools is, if you're absentee, they punish kids, and it's like coordinate with, it's like they bring in like penalties on the kids and the families, and I appreciate that we have a collaborative approach because there's so much research. There was earlier this week on KQED forum, chronic absenteeism was the topic, and so much research keeps going back to parent engagement and parent partnership. So I feel optimistic that if we continue to focus on this idea that that aligning ourselves with parents and that parents and their kids, if we all kind of work in the same direction, we can address this because that's what the research shows. I welcome that that we continue to invest and support the school district and on that parent engagement. And there's little things that we can look at in the future, like like teachers have a lot of kids, and sometimes and there's so many different languages spoken at home. So there are tools I think in the future that can assist us even more in building parent to teacher and parent to school site communication, whether it be like auto translation tools. And I know that some teachers in our district use Remind as an app, and there's all these other companies are trying to provide further ways to make it a lot easier for teachers and site to communicate in a diverse community. So, thank you.
Trustee Blakely.
Just one very short comment. I'm really glad that we are doing on training for the principals and staff to mitigate the negative effects of bias on discipline. And I'm just glad we're kind of drilling down to that level. So appreciate that work.
Trustee Berman.
I just want to appreciate that there were some bright spots in Ms. Bauer's presentation tonight about, Castor doing an excellent job of reducing the chronic absenteeism from last year, and it definitely shows up in their site plan, as well as that focus across other schools. And I also want to celebrate the literacy team for making such big movements in their data for the supporting tier 3 students, and then transitioning out shows that that attention early on I'm sure will have a positive impact as we begin to see those kids move through grade levels. I was also thinking in this presentation, President Conley, about our visit to the shelter, and something that I was reminded of in those conversations when we did the visit was adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs, right? That that trauma that oftentimes our homeless students experience stays with them throughout childhood and has an adverse negative consequences for these children as they become young adults and adults. So they are more at a disadvantage because of these experiences, academically, behaviorally, and in future opportunities as well. And I looked at the Castro site plan, and there's about 21% of the students there are considered McKinney-Vento. So I think that, I'm so glad that we have a focus to dive really deep into sort of the needs of the Castro community so that we can make thoughtful decisions about how we support our students and our families and our staff there, so we can have terrific outcomes for those students in the future.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? I would like to thank Chief Academic Officer Bauer and all of the staff that put in many hours on this report. It really is extensive, and it's trying to boil down some very complex data from the state in a way that's digestible for the general public. I can't say that I disagree with our public speaker. I would love to see the numbers of students that fall into the different categories. That helps me process it. But I also know it's hard to squeeze everything into the tables. So that might be more in a report format than in the slide itself. I wish this dashboard was released in time to be incorporated into our goal setting for our school site plans, because it's such a helpful lens. And I know this is work we're already doing, but it might shift the emphasis or give us insights that are really useful. The Castro chronic absenteeism, for example, yes, it's improving, but when we look at the school site plan proposed for this year, we adopted a metric of 10% growth, which is an algorithm we use for our academic goals within the school site plans. We also used it for the behavioral goals, including chronic absenteeism. So for the Castro school site plan, that means moving from 28.8% chronic absenteeism to 25.8%. It's only a 3% change. But chronic absenteeism is much more volatile than that. And I think we need to make much, much more significant change than 3%. I know the principal Kearns is working on this and understands that, but I think we need to take that into account in how we're setting the goals for our school site plans in the future. And also the cognitive dissonance of having high suspension rates at a school paired with trying to bring down chronic absenteeism at the same time is confounding. It really does hurt my brain to think about we're suspending students and yet we're also seeing chronic absenteeism that we're trying to decrease. So we've got to figure out how to manage that situation. And we're committed to pouring a lot of resources into Castro. We're doing a study session specifically on Castro. We already have extra funding there, but we want to really double down on how we're serving the students at that school. And then finally, trustees, I brought this item near the beginning of our evening and moved closed session to the end because I think what I saw at our last meeting in December was how much everyone enjoys actually getting to talk about student achievement and student outcomes and how we can serve students within our board meetings. And I thought I would set the tone for us as often as possible to try and do that earlier in the meeting and really guide us forward. On that note, we will now move on to item 7B, the United Against Hate Week, with a presentation from Director of Equity Pullman.
Good evening, trustees. First, allow me to say I'm so embarrassed. I'm responsible for the interruption in terms of the unmuting before. I am at Santa Clara right now in the middle of going between class. And so I apologize that the technology was a hiccup there and I interrupted the meeting twice. So I wanted to first say how sorry I was for that. But I'll go ahead and launch the presentation here and actually get to share with you, which has kind of become a little bit of a rarity these days, just getting to brag about some of the awesome work that our school sites are doing. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the work that we've done with Better Together and United Against Hate Week in Mountain View Wisman this school year. And the work started, as you remember, a couple years ago when the Board of Trustees passed a resolution in support of recognizing United Against Hate Week with a movement that initially was launched in Northern California that year, or that previous year. So this was our second year of recognizing United Against Hate Week. And again, we passed a resolution this past year. The last year's activities were similar to this year, so you'll see some similar things. Site-based activities happening at every single school, assemblies, even community get-togethers after school. The Teen Center in Mountain View High School were involved in some of our activities last year. Of course, it's aligned with our strategic plan in terms of student social emotional health and creating an inclusive and welcoming culture. And one of the things I wanted to highlight too, there's a lot of terms kind of get thrown around in terms of United Against Hate Week, No Place for Hate, Better Together. What I wanted to affirm to you though, like unlike many other organizations or school districts that kind of hire out or purchase culture and climate programs, I am really proud to say that Mountain View Wisman has created their own culture and climate program and set of initiatives, and that is called Better Together. And so Better Together is the umbrella term that encapsulates a lot of the culture and climate programs that we have, United Against Hate being one of them. So just as a refresher, Better Together is our culture and climate program that's created in-house here at Mountain View Wisman. And the transformation of climate and culture is really for us about integrating students in peer conversations and leadership, publicizing school practices and policies around culture, a culture of inclusivity and diversity, for increased visibility and involvement from students and the larger community. And then it's also about providing learning opportunities for teachers and staff to build knowledge. So Chief Academic Officer Bauer was talking about the PD that just took place, and I'll touch on that here in just a second as well. Of course, we want to pay attention to kind of the ebbs and flows of what's happening in our schools by taking survey data from students. So we do monitor culture and climate of schools using LCAP survey data, which is 4th through 8th grade. It's taken every year. That allows us to collect information related to safety, belonging, peer relationships from students and parents and staff every year. So again, that's conducted for students 4th through 8th grade, as well as parents and staff members. You may have seen this before, and this is our theme for this year for Better Together. So again, Better Together is that umbrella term. Last year, the theme was belonging. This year, the theme is allyship, and allyship is elemental. We try to break it down into a really consumable set of ideas. And being an ally doesn't just mean being a friend. Being an ally actually means knowing when to step back, knowing when to stand beside, and knowing when to step up in service for others. So the components of allyship are actually built into a yearly calendar and a digital matrix of activities that teachers and community members can reference each month. So the calendar is hanging itself in each and every classroom in our district, and teachers are trained each month from their principals on the topics and the resources available for that month through the monthly training decks. There's of course blurbs in the newsletter and of course in the weeklies as well for our board members to read. This year we are pursuing a designation of No Place for Hate, which is a program through the Anti-Defamation League for all schools in our district. So it will be really exciting in May, June, so at the end of the school year, when we get to celebrate all schools being designated as No Place for Hate schools. And that's a culmination of the work that they put towards 3 different activities and weaving in the No Place for Hate pledge at a school assembly. There was a PD that just happened on January 8th for site administrators and teachers. And something else that we're working on through the anti-bias grant that we were given from the California Department of Ed is looking specifically at bias-related incidents as they happen in middle school and how to really use a restorative justice approach to having students reflect and attend re-education sessions when those incidents do occur. This is just a quick look at some of those physical materials that I just talked about in terms of the calendar, the digital matrix of activities, and of course the books that we've bought for each school that are available in the library each month that help teachers and community members help students answer the essential questions for each month. We put together a quick little video of some pictures of all the activities that took place at all of the school sites. And so I'm going to play the video actually, but there's no, I think there's a song that goes along with it. There we go. And what you're seeing here is activities that are happening at each school. Each school did choose.
I want our school to be no place for hate. Thank you, Vargas students. Our school is gonna be a place where we don't hate each other. We take care of each other, okay?
Bueno, y esta semana que comenzamos es una semana muy importante para nosotros aquí en la aula local y para mí felicito, porque vamos a estar participando. No hay lugar para el otro en nuestra escuela, en nuestro distrito, en nuestra comunidad. Todos son bienvenidos, todos son aceptados, no importa de dónde venimos, cuáles son las otras culturas y si somos diferentes.
Thank you so much to our communications team for putting that together. And I just wanted to reiterate what you saw in the video, which was that each site administrators worked really diligently. They selected a school-wide theme using some of the components of allyship based on the needs of their site. There were in-class components, so every student was touched by classroom activities during that week of November 13th through 17th, United Against Hate Week. Those activities were culturally responsive and developmentally appropriate. In addition, there was actually a student committee at each school that was responsible for planning some activities related to the No Place for Hate pledge that was taken by all students during that week. So again, we're trying to really reinforce that student voice and student-directed activities should be guiding a lot of our culture and climate initiatives. Of course, photos and videos were taken, new newsletters and emails were sent out to all community members during that week. And something that's a part of United Against Hate Week or was incorporated with it, but also stands alone as its own initiative this year is our designation for all schools being a no place for hate. So all sites are working towards their designation. Like I said, we anticipate the announcement of the designation coming in May of this year. In order to receive that designation, each school site has to complete 3 activities that are student-driven, student-led. All students participate. And then incorporate the No Place for Hate pledge as a part of that. So they've already done some activities towards this designation during United Against Hate Week. We look forward to 2 more activity sessions in the coming year. In addition to earning their designation, the district hosted the Anti-Defamation League World of Difference Institute. Trainers came from all over the state. Each teacher participated in a 3-hour half-day training on leadership skills to help challenge prejudice, discrimination and bias in their classrooms, and to help, of course, with their students, foster intergroup understanding, and to allow them to engage their students on issues such as diversity in the classroom, name calling, bullying, and cyberbullying, etc. It was a wonderful day of training. I got to attend multiple sites. Everyone was really engaged, and the facilitators were really exceptional. So I'm really looking forward to looking at the survey data that comes from the teachers, and to see how they respond to it. Our anticipated impacts for this culture and climate program, of course, we want to keep Better Together going because it is our in-house culture and climate program. The new yearly theme will be unveiled at the beginning of next school year, along with the calendar. So we'll continue those components as they've been helpful to our teachers. And I'm going to continue to process and refine the materials as we get feedback, of course. PD for teachers and staff will continue. It's important to develop, of course, a shared language around bias-related speech and incidents, things like bias in the discipline process, practical, effective ways for staff to address and disrupt bias, and that no place for hate designation is getting students excited about sustaining a program for years to come. And again, it's allowed us to invite schools to build a student committee that does some student-driven activities for culture and climate. So we look forward to continuing those efforts. Some strengths has been setting aside a time each year, United Against Hate Week, that offers us a chance to celebrate, reflect, right, and come together as a school site and do a lot of these activities. The consistent branding of Better Together is also one of our strengths. Like I said, we don't purchase a program from someone or rely on another organization. We're really building our culture and climate program in-house. The district-wide scope of Better Together hopes, to really create collective effort. So all of us are in charge of our culture and climate, from every staff member to every student to every teacher. Now, this isn't an easy thing to do always, right? Current LCAP data is very consistent in terms of letting us measure culture and climate issues, but not always very specific. So we're currently, as a part of the work with the anti-bias grant, looking at a ways to get more rich qualitative data about student experiences, especially for our middle schoolers, to help us continue to refine some of these programs and to help us plan. So we're going to continue to work with the District Equity Advisory Committee to actually develop and select a theme for next year based on LCAP data. The World of Difference Institute, like I said, was a success on January 8th. So I look forward to looking at that survey data. And of course, continuing to have conversations with teachers about bias and bias-related incidents. We're going to continue to train some middle school teachers to be anti-bias coaches, again, as our program as a part of the anti-bias grant. And then we're also currently exploring ways to collect student data on culture and climate issues to help in action planning that's a little bit more specific and qualitative in nature. So with that, that's the end of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions and hear your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Pullman. Are there questions from trustees? Vice President Chang.
Thank you. I had a question about if there are any grade levels where we teach students to have courageous conversations around current events and controversial issues, and welcome any information on that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. The monthly topics and essential questions do a really good job of helping teachers broach different topics every month. So while the overall yearly theme is allyship, the very first topic is identity. So that was the topic in September. And so each month after identity, it was cultural appreciation. And in this month is January, it's conflict resolution. So it's specifically about having difficult conversations about topics, even with friends. And so the resources provided in the digital matrix are activities that are meant to help teachers facilitate conversations about difficult topics in the classroom. Those activities come in grade level bands, so they're developmentally appropriate. So there's always an activity each month for K through 2 and 3 through 5, as well as books that are in our libraries that help teachers broach those topics. So really the idea is to use the building blocks of kind of those larger topics to help teachers facilitate those conversations and kind of get better at it as they practice over time.
Thank you. A follow-up, specifically on the current war in Gaza. Do we know if there are any grade levels that have been facilitating discussions about that?
I couldn't point to any specific curriculum or piece of curriculum that would necessarily address that. Though the larger concepts in terms of learning about like conflict resolution, for example, in January, learning about Poverty Awareness Month, all of those kind of different things. I'm sure that's coming into the classroom, but I'm not aware of specific lessons or activities that are being planned around that.
There are no further questions from trustees. We'll move to public comment. If you're a member of the public and you would like to comment on this item, you may raise your hand in Zoom, press *9 on your phone, or approach the podium if you're here in person. Seeing as there are no comments at this time, we will move on to comments from trustees. Vice President Chang.
Thank you. Just follow up on the question I asked about facilitating in schools, teaching students how to have courageous conversations, which involves learning how to listen to each other and creating a safe space at school to talk about tough issues. Because like I'm really proud of this what we're doing on telling students how to be to not be biased but that I think is a pillar. But I think a second pillar that we need is schools being a place where they can have safe conversations about tough topics. And I asked Therese about the war in Gaza because some of you may have seen the news that in the neighboring district in Los Altos School District, a block at their middle school there, there was recent horrible incidences of Jewish students being targeted with swastikas being graffitied on their property. And if I feel that when we have this theme of allyship as our topic for our theme for this year, along with that, we have to have conversations on campus because part of allyship, is teaching students about being an ally is like it's part of this intersectional movement, right? And if we look at the controversy and the difficulties happening on college campuses, it's because young people see that being an ally is to speak up, but they're not learning how to speak up in safe ways, right? So we're seeing, these conversations broil over at the colleges and high schools, and then Los Altos School District, in some ways, boiling out to the middle schools. It's happening because young people are trying to be allies, but they aren't learning and having places to listen to each other. We have in our community, Mountain Views in our schools, and on this particular issue of the war in Gaza, we have students who are directly impacted on both sides. We have students who have lost family who are Israelis or have family who are in Israel. And we have Palestinians in our school district who have lost family. So there is a lot of pain on this current topic that if we don't provide safe ways to learn and talk to each other at schools, then it broils out into hate. Right? We're seeing that in the colleges. If we don't create safe places for kids, age-appropriate conversations, and maybe I'm thinking particularly in the middle schools, if we don't create ways for them to be able to talk about controversial issues on campus, then it increments, then it kind of devolves into bias and hate and hurtful ways to communicate. So yeah, I was really glad we saw that. I saw in there that the teachers are going to take part in ADL's World of Difference, their institute. And I was happy when I was looking at that part of the curriculum there was teaching educators on how to have courageous conversations with kids. So I would just welcome us look deeply in that as an additional pillar, along with telling kids not to be bullies. Thank you.
Trustee Blakely.
This is more speculation rather than anything, but we unfortunately in the past, since I've been on the school board, have had some incidences of swastikas and other, hate, I'm going to call it speech symbols, whatever. We have had those behaviors. And sadly, we probably will again. But I would just wonder, this is my speculation, if part of the reason we haven't seen any of that bubble up recently is because of this program that we're having and having the students talk about these conversations and how to stand up. And so I'm grateful that we haven't had those problems, and I hope that this helps students be able to do that. But appreciate your point about you need to implement it, but maybe they are. Thank you.
Trustee Berman.
Just want to add that I'm really excited about the theme this year, the ally theme. It's a powerful theme, and I'm excited for students to understand what being an ally sounds like and looks like, and that for children to know that at any age they can be an ally in their community, in their school, with their classmates. So I'm just really excited to see how this rolls out throughout the year.
Vice President Chang.
And I just want to I'm going to say this because I'm really afraid of what happens when I looked at what happened in the colleges. When we teach allyship, we have to be really careful because what's happening and why colleges become an unsafe place for Jewish students is because young people in our pursuing actions in allyship, right? People are pursuing actions in allyship and in support of humanity and support of ending the war in Gaza. But the way they're doing it has created an unsafe place in many colleges. So like, yes, allyship, it's a great topic. It's important, but that's actually why colleges are unsafe right now. So I just encourage our staff to dig deeper because this war is not ending, and we have students in our community and even past incidents of anti-Semitism here. So we got to like look at this in a nuanced and complex way. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Director Pullman for her presentation tonight and for really driving this work for our district. It is not easy. I think it's relatively unique that our district has taken this on in this way. I know that I am constantly working on what allyship means for myself and how to be a better ally and create safe places for disagreement as well. Like it is hard work even for adults. I am very happy with the way, focusing on identity and then focusing on cultural appreciation, learning about other people's identities, learning about other things that are important to students who might not be like you in different ways, and building not just our understanding of each other, but building friendships and relationships between children. We start at a very young age, but I think those are some of the building blocks for those courageous conversations in the future. On that note, we will move on to item C, the joint use agreement update.
All right, so we're just, the board requested that we provide a response or update on the joint use agreement. Just want to be clear that Mountain View Wisman only has one joint use agreement, and it is in the description. This is the second time that we've had this item, so in the description, it clearly indicates that this is just simply an update for what the board has passed. The good news is that it appears that this will be placed on the January 23rd meeting of City Council. And as far as I understand, that their staff will be recommending for its approval too. So it looks like we're good to go, but we'll stay tuned in the event that something else comes up. But we've talked with their staff, and I know that a couple trustees have also had an opportunity to talk with some staff members too at Tuesday's City Council meeting. But as far as we know, we should be good to go and that this one will be put to rest.
I know this is a brief item. Are there any questions from trustees? No. Are there comments? Yes, Vice President Chang.
Will there be anything kind of like celebratory done? Kind of whether just, I mean, spend so much time and energy put in on this issue. Now that it's done, I imagine when this first was created a long, long time ago, we used to celebrate about these kinds of things. So
We didn't have anything planned, but we can definitely reach out to the city to see if they want to jointly do something with us.
All right, we will move on to public comment. If you're a member of the public and you'd like to comment on this item, you can approach the podium in person, or in Zoom, you can raise your hand or press *9 on your phone. I do not see any comments online. We do have one in-person comment. You may begin. The timer is up.
Okay, my name is former trustee Stephen Nielsen. Board, please keep this agreement going smoothly. I think in my opinion, much of the community sentiment is that, it depends on your negotiating team. So make sure you keep your negotiating team in a way that they're going to respect the whole community, not just, they're talking among themselves and maybe talking to you in private when you have closed sessions. So that's what I want to say. This has been going on since the 1950s. It involved a separate agreement that was first done on this side of the tracks on the Mountain View Wisman School District. And when the other side of, or the Mountain View District, when the other side the tracks. The Wistman School District saw it happen. They said, this is such a good idea. We want the city to do one of these kind of agreements with us. And since the superintendent brought it up, the word in your closed session says payment related to joint use agreement. That's what the words are. So it's confusing. He can say what he wants. The words in your adopted agenda contradict his version of what he's telling you reality is. But so this must be wrong, I guess, the one that's in the conference with real property negotiators. Nevertheless, doesn't handle the Brown Act when you're not explicit what this joint use agreement is about.
Thank you, former trustee Nelson. We will now move on to item, well, unless are there further comments from trustees at this time? Okay. We will now move on to item 8. This is the opportunity for members of the public to address the board concerning items on the closed session agenda. Now is the time for members of the public who would like to address the board regarding closed session agenda items to do so. Tonight's closed session has 3 items. To address the board, you can approach the podium, raise your hand in Zoom, or press star 9 on your phone. We have a very quiet online presence tonight. There are no hands in Zoom. Yeah, so we have 1 speaker in person. We will put a 3-minute timer up. All right, you may address the board.
Hi. By the way, that's good because if all this stuff is early and they're not having to sit and wait for the closed session to end, it means those ones who are listening aren't having too much problems understanding what's going on. I hope this is a closed session agenda, and so we don't know what's going to happen on here. But I hope that Trustee Lampert is still urging you to, as he did in public last decade, urging you to make sure you're getting market rate for any of these properties like the Woods preschool, which used to be an entire Slater school over at Gladys Avenue. I hope you do listen to him because I doubt he's changed his attitude, which enlightened us on the board at the time he brought it up, that we should make sure we get the true value of these properties for our school district because it really is for the learning of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, former trustee Nelson. And at 7:46 p.m., we will now adjourn to closed session. At 9:55 PM, closed session is adjourned and we are reopening open session. No action was taken during closed session. We will now move on to, we've reconvened open session. We will move on to item 11, board updates. People want to send those in, okay. We were going to have sort of for item 12, a report out about CSBA or AEC, what you learned at the annual education convention, but we can do that at a different time. And for item 13, our future board meeting dates, we have a study session for the 18th that wasn't on the posted agenda, but that's because it's not a regular meeting.
Correct.
And then we have January 25th, February 8th, and February 29th. And at 9:56 PM, this meeting of the Mountain